Richard E. Byrd, the pioneering first to fly an air route to the North Pole, was planning an even more ambitious mission over the Earth's bottom. For almost 8 decades, silence shrouded his life. Orders required it. Careers were built on it, and countries liked it that way. But now, at the twilight of his years, Robert Johnson has chosen to shatter that silence. What he discovers isn't the sanitized hero version in textbooks or the rosy stories of adventurers grinning in the snow. It's another story, one of lost teams, disappeared hours, and taboo discoveries hidden behind a continent of ice. Why was Operation Highjump armed as an invasion force, with aircraft carriers and tanks, to do what the media announced was only a research mission? Why did a whole team disappear on ideal weather, only to be deleted from official records? And what actually transpired during the 3 missing hours when Admiral Byrd's aircraft lost radio contact? Only come back shaken and refusing to outline his path. For 77 years, reality remained locked in silence. Admiral Richard Evelyn Byrd, Jr. was never a typical naval officer. Born in 1888 to a well-known Virginia family, he bore the burden of expectation as soon as he put on a uniform for the first time. His life was more a script from an adventure novel, flamboyant flights, hair-raising escapes, and an insatiable need to explore where no man had explored before. In 1926, Byrd insisted that he was the first to fly over the North Pole. Whether all the details of that flight were accurate or not, the feat made him an overnight hero. He was awarded the Medal of Honor by the U.S. Congress, and the American people hailed him as a national hero. Before long, he was breaking records on the other side of the Atlantic, and in 1929, he was the first one to fly over the South Pole. The newspapers loved him. His piercing blue eyes, his gentlemanly manners, and his quiet charm made him the poster boy of American drive during the machine age. 3 ticker tape parades honored him by the city of New York. Only Charles Lindbergh was his rival in fame. But whereas the public gazed upon a daring adventurer mapping out empty spaces on a map, Byrd himself beheld something different. To him, Antarctica wasn't a barren wasteland. It was a frontier yet be opened, a white page on which he could inscribe history. And with each expedition, rumors spread that what he found there wasn't for the public eye. For Byrd, the poles weren't the edge of the world. They were the start of an enigma much larger than anyone could envision. In 1939, shortly before another Antarctic expedition, a 19-year-old Sea Scout named Robert Johnson showed up for a Navy interview in Norfolk, Virginia. He anticipated being asked about sailing, navigation, or whether he could stand the cold. Instead, the questions were unusual and disconcerting. "Are you able to keep a secret?" Admiral Byrd inquired. "Are you totally loyal to the United States?" Johnson was taken aback, but replied affirmatively. He did not boast and exaggerate like the rest of the contestants. He was composed, respectful, and quiet. Byrd observed. Even in that dark room, Johnson could tell this wasn't a typical research assignment. Something was different, something that necessitated complete quiet. Without ado, Byrd selected him. For Johnson, it was a lifetime honor. He was still in his teens and now bound to one of America's greatest explorers. But he had no idea yet of the price. He had merely boarded a road that would tie him to a secret that he would not speak for almost 80 years. It seemed initially like the stuff of boyhood fantasy. Ships into the white unknown, airplanes gliding over the frozen horizon, and men united by the shared adventure of survival. But as Johnson afterward confessed, those journeys contained moments that didn't fit into the official history. Moments of odd anomalies, inexplicable readings, and silent decisions Byrd made without rationale. Johnson's loyalty was Byrd's greatest strength, but it also made him witness to one of the most mysterious episodes in 20th century exploration. To the public in the 1940s, Antarctica was simply a blank, lifeless region at the bottom of the world. But to the world powers on the brink of the Cold War, it represented something much more, the last great untapped frontier. Underneath the miles of ice, scientists whispered of great riches. Coal, oil, and even uranium. Whoever owned those riches might own the future. Washington, Berlin, and Moscow no longer viewed Antarctica as frozen wasteland, but as a gigantic chessboard. One flag planted there might alter the balance of world power. Yet the men who walked those icy plains experienced something different. Compasses spun without reason. Radios died and revived as if nothing had happened. Sometimes the aurora australis shimmered for hours in shapes that looked deliberate, almost alive. Veteran explorers muttered that the sky itself was watching them. Officers dismissed such talk, but Byrd often adjusted flight plans whenever unusual readings appeared. Johnson recalled one flight, though, a shining streak on the ice, its inner glow faint. The later logs described it as an atmospheric phenomenon, but the crew did not think so. The earth below the plane seemed to hum, as if something enormous was hidden just beneath. The mountains themselves looked unnatural, black rock poking through snow like shattered teeth. There were some slopes that were desolate even under sub-zero weather, as if stripped clean from underneath. He would never forget the day he stumbled over a huge crack exhaling warm air, mist rising up into the frozen sky. He stood at its rim and vowed he could feel a low hum vibrating through the soles of his boots, like distant machinery running. For field men, these things bred fear. For field men in Washington, they generated curiosity. Antarctica was no longer wilderness. It was now a prize to be fought over. In August 1946, barely a year since the end of World War II, the United States initiated Operation Highjump. Officially, it was a test of men and machines in a cold environment, charting unknown coastlines and rehearsing resupply missions under hostile conditions. That was the version palmed off on the newspapers. But to those who really set sail for the South, it didn't appear scientific. It seemed like war. Operation Highjump had 14 vessels, an aircraft carrier, destroyers, and submarines. It took 33 planes and more than 4,700 men. Tanks, trucks, and all the hardware to equip a small army were crammed in the holds. No one required that much firepower to observe penguins. Robert Johnson, now in his 20s, was among them. He remembered the atmosphere on the ships, tight, vigilant, and heavy with secrecy. Rumors circulated in the mess areas of German U-boats fleeing south in the war's last days, rumors of a secret Nazi base hidden under the ice, and reports of warm water oases capable of sustaining permanent operations. When the fleet reached Antarctica, Johnson first got the feeling that something was amiss. There were always two versions of the mission on the go simultaneously. On the outside, all was normal. Photographers taking pictures of men standing alongside penguins, scientists taking wind readings, and official reports detailing progress. But beneath that, an alternate, more clandestine operation was being conducted. Flights departed that weren't scheduled. Orders were being issued face-to-face rather than on the radio. And some crews came back from missions refusing to discuss what they'd experienced. To Johnson, it was less about exploration and more about the initial phase of a clandestine campaign. One misstep, and they didn't know if they'd encountered bad weather, old foes, or something unknown. And then came command that would alter all. Johnson was to accompany an infantry unit into a region designated as hostile. He could not have guessed at what they found, or did not find, would destroy the official account once and for all. The day was crystal clear, the air immobile and crisp. The ground party departed with sleds, rations, and functioning radios into a mountainous area where earlier surveys had indicated unusual patterns of melting, as if heat was emanating from beneath the ice. Johnson's section remained behind for logistic support. He recalled seeing the dark outlines of the men receding into the white distance. Hours ticked by. The sky was still clear, and then radio silence. The official report subsequently asserted that there had been a sudden storm and the men were caught in collapsing crevasses. But there had been no storm that day. It was remarkably still, the sky unbroken with clouds. The search was half-hearted, and the area closed off very quickly. Instructions went down prohibiting further inquiry. From then on, there was a change in mood throughout the fleet. Talk fell to whispers. Eyes became suspicious, and a nervous tension befell the men. New off-limits zones emerged on charts. Some mountains were suddenly forbidden. Crews whispered of uncharted flights that came back with shuddering, uncommunicative men. Books didn't exist where they should have. Johnson was certain then that Antarctica was concealing something, and that their assignment wasn't what the world had been led to believe. Admiral Richard Byrd, the most honored polar pilot on Earth, departed shortly afterward on what was intended to be a routine reconnaissance mission. All went as usual, until his radio fell silent. 3 hours passed with no signal, no message, nothing. Official records only noted his takeoff and landing, as if those 3 hours never existed. When Byrd landed, Johnson realized something was terribly amiss. The Admiral's face was white, his hands trembling, his voice absent. He declined to document his flight route or comment on what he had witnessed. Years afterward, a claimed duplicate of Byrd's personal diary was uncovered, detailing a concealed valley of emerald fields, iridescent rivers, and vanished beasts believed to be extinct mammoths, and even a glimmering crystal city protected by flying disc-shaped vehicles. The diary was a hoax, skeptics claimed. But Johnson couldn't shake the fact that Byrd had returned visibly shaken, and that, shortly after, a new off-limits area was inscribed on the maps. Johnson himself was assigned to protect an unlisted sector. He never forgot the phrase Byrd muttered in the corridor. "We saw something out there we weren't supposed to. Never forget it." Shortly afterwards, Johnson had received covert instructions, handed verbally, with no documentation, to command a small group on a covert mission far into the heart of the continent. The coordinates they were provided with did not appear on any map. Upon arrival, the terrain transformed. A gigantic metal ridge of the ice thrust upwards, the atmosphere was warmer, and a distant humming vibration vibrated the ground. At the bottom was a long, sharp fissure that appeared to be carved more than natural. They were instructed to look, but not go down. In a few minutes, one of the officers disregarded that instruction and went down. The rope became slack. He was never seen again. A second man went down and was hauled back thrashing, alive but speechless. He never uttered a word again. Days later, the entire area was bombed and covered. Johnson assumed that was it, but eventually he was sent to stand watch over what was called an abandoned weather station. What he discovered instead was a staircase cut out of the ice, smooth, unblemished, and obviously artificial. "That was concrete," he testified later. "I recognized concrete." The stairwell led down into blackness, radiating the same mild buzz he'd previously experienced. A fellow officer had tried to take pictures of the location, but was mysteriously fired the following day, and the photographs were never heard of again. Shortly afterward, the stairway was closed and covered up. Johnson knew what the truth was. Something intelligent and ancient had once lived beneath Antarctica, and someone was set on keeping it under wraps. When Operation Highjump had suddenly been shut down months earlier than planned, the cover-up was clear. Reports were gone, photographs were gone, and flight records were incomplete. Whole names disappeared from the roster, as if those men never even existed. Byrd, who had always been vocal and fearless, quit speaking of what he had discovered. In his last press conference, he spoke of a new power that could travel from pole to pole at incredible speeds, but then never spoke of it again. From that point on, he avoided dangerous subjects, weather, supply and transportation, and science. The world thought Operation Highjump had simply failed prematurely. But Johnson knew otherwise. It hadn't failed. It had discovered something too dangerous to share.